Hi, my name is Dave Bang. I'm going to be doing rooting hydroponically today. One of the reasons why I've always done hydroponically is that I found that just through experimentation it's always worked out the best for me. In the past there have been people that have shown me that doing the dirt method has worked good for them. I've tried that in the past. Got some half-decent results using the bagging method, using a Ziploc bag and putting some garden soil or potting soil in there and putting the cuttings in. But that seemed to always be difficult in terms of pulling them out once they produce the roots, and sometimes you damage the roots, that kind of thing. And then other methods have been having a Tupperware container and putting the cuttings directly into the soil. But then also you had the problem of removing them from the Tupperware container, and you damage the roots that way as well. So I decided to go ahead and put pretty much the same thing, but having a little cup, having a little potting cup and putting them inside the Tupperware container and just lining them up inside the Tupperware container. This way you can actually pull the entire cup out without damaging the roots, and then you can tip it upside down and pull them out. But I've always found that the success rate has been much less, and it seemed like a lot of the cuttings would get brown and they would just basically rot. So when I was really young, my dad had put a cutting inside a glass of water and it just rooted. But the root was kind of poor and things didn't really go that well, and when we tried to plant it in dirt it didn't seem to continue to grow, it just died. So I tried to use that method by using the Tupperware container and using hormone as well. So what I did was I put the Tupperware container and put a little bit of water at the bottom and put in a bunch of yogurt cups full of water, and then put cuttings in there that had the hormone on them. And I put them in there for about 2 weeks. It seemed like nothing was really happening, so I decided to go ahead and take them out, wash them off, and put them in a clean cup of water. Well, I checked back about 2 to 3 weeks later, and all of a sudden I had a massive explosion of growth of roots. So that's how the method basically came about. So the time that you want to take your cutting is when the bloom has just bloomed and it's open right now, or has just died. The reason why you want to do it at that time is that if you take it before it is actually fully opened, then the cane will actually be too soft and it won't root very well. And if you take it too late, where the bloom has expired, and then these bud eyes will start producing growth, and that's not what you want. You want to make sure that the bud eyes are dormant so that all of the energy is concentrated on actually rooting. Okay? So unfortunately this sample is not what we want, so bear with me here. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you take a cutting. I found that in the past, if you take a cutting right here underneath the bud eye, that has always produced pretty good results. But I found that if you go back to the point where it originated, that's actually even better. Okay? So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and take a cutting of it real quick. Okay, so basically we need to prep the sample right now. I like to have a very clean foliage. This way we know that there's no bacteria on the plant to start decaying it basically in the hot, humid environment. So what I like to do is I like to put it underneath the water and go ahead and rub all the leaves like this to try and get any kind of debris or bugs or anything like that, because the bugs like to lay their eggs underneath the foliage and mess it all up. So we need to go through, clean everything up. Once we've done that, I like to have about 4 or 5 leaves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In this case, we'll go ahead and cut off the top one. And we always want to do all of this underneath the water so that we don't get an air embolism inside here. So before, like I was saying, that there would normally be a bloom right here, and you would go ahead and cut that off. Remove that. And what we want to do is we want to rub the bottom of the cane right here so that there's this waxy resin that repels the water is removed. This way the water will stick to the cane much better. Now granted, we need to keep in mind that this sample is taken at the wrong time of the year, and we would not want to have these new growths coming out right here. All of these would be dormant bud eyes. Now a bud eye would be like this growth right here. Okay, we've changed the setup a little bit here for film purposes, but basically you always want to do this underneath the water. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to remove all of the thorns that may be in this area here. You can leave them up here if you want. The reason why we remove the thorns is because the roots will actually grow from the thorns in some areas, and also they will grow out in the void here where there's absolutely nothing, and roots will also grow from where the bud eye used to be. So the bud eye is where a new growth will actually form, and that's what you see here up in these magenta areas. Okay, so normally we would actually go ahead and remove the bottom leaf like this so that you have one or two bud eyes down here, so that this is where we would apply the hormone. Now if you have a sample, in this case we have new growth coming out here, and that's absolutely what you don't want. Because it's February, this is the only sample that we have here. Now we would want all of these bud eyes to be completely dormant. All we want are the old leaf growths that are pointing out. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's adequate. You never want to pull these leaves off because you want foliage so that the plant can have a little bit of nourishment from the sun. And of course the hormone will give it some nutrient as well. So what we want to do is we want to cut. And the way I've taught in the past is that you want to do it about a half or a quarter of an inch below the nearest bud eye, which would be right about here. But I've actually found that if you go back to the origin of where this bud eye grew, that's actually the best place to actually cut. So what I do is cut right here, just below the bud eye. And of course you'd want to do this underneath the water because you don't want to get an air embolism in here. Okay, so like I was saying before, there's a waxy resin on the outside here that we don't want, so we'll rub this underneath the water to remove it, and then this way we can have the water stick to it well, and then when we dip it in the hormone it'll actually stick onto it quite well, and that'll be the next thing that we need to do. Okay, so now that we've shown you that, we'll just we'll go over this one more time. Basically we have that cutting, and we've cut off the bottom here, and we've allowed the foliage to remain, and we've cleaned off the bottom. We're doing this always underneath the water. Now we need to actually apply the hormone. Now I've actually used a number of different hormones, and the gels and things like that have never really worked for this water method very well, so I've used just the powders. Now the shulls take root. It works, but not nearly as good, and in most cases it's produced just a callus at the bottom, and it's produced some small roots that were not very impressive to me, so I don't particularly care for the shulls. But the Rootone has always worked the best for me, and these were some of the results that we've achieved by doing that. So you can see that the roots are quite aggressive, and they're very healthy. And this would be a sample just prior to the roots actually starting to develop as well. So it gets these little fluffy little white growths, and then you'll start seeing the roots emerge from that later on. Also, you can see that on this one, it's growing roots from the bud eye, from where we tore off that leaf there, and it's starting to produce some cracks and some bumps as well, and in the close-ups you'll be able to see those a little bit later. So basically there's a number of places in which the roots will actually start to grow. Sometimes they'll grow straight out the bottom, they'll come out of the voids here where the cracks start producing, and also in the bud eyes. So there's a number of areas, and also where the thorns used to be as well. That's why we tear off the thorns. So there's the different areas in which the roots will actually emerge from. So like I said, we want to rub the bottom so that the water sticks to the the cane well, and we'll put the cane inside the hormone. And if you're concerned about fungus and stuff like that, then you probably don't want to stick it down inside the bottle, but it's never been a problem for me, and these have fungicides in them as well. So basically I stick it in there, and I want to make sure that I have at least 1 or 2 bud eyes with the hormone covering it. And also I like to just go ahead and stack these on a cup somewhere for about 30 to 45 seconds. And the reason I do that is so that the moisture will wick inside the hormone, so that it becomes more of a clay-like material. Because if you immediately put it directly into the water, because of surface tension, the water will just push the hormone right off the cane. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have your cup, and you want to label it. We'll put the date, February 15th, 2013, and the name of the rose, because more than likely you're going to want to put a number of different types of, whether it be Black Magic or whatever, Sheila's perfume, and you may get them confused, and you want to make sure that you have all those labeled properly. And so like I normally just use these yogurt cups, and I can use some clear cups that I bring back from Costco, where I used to get strawberry ice cream or something like that. So I'll fill them up about halfway, which is a little 6-ounce cup here, and I'll go ahead and just put the cane inside the water there. Okay. Okay, so now that we've established how we set up the cane and it's all ready to go and the hormone is on it, basically this is the environment in which I like to grow them in. It's basically a Tupperware container. You can get them at Costco for 3 of them for about $15, so they're relatively cheap, and it's pretty easy. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and put all of my cuttings in here, and like I said, you can have probably about 12 to 15 of them in here. And what we want to do is put all the cuttings in there, and then at the bottom we want to fill it up with about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch of water. And the reason for that is that when it's humid in here, the plants will grow much faster. They won't dry out. So the water, the humidity inside will accumulate, it'll collect up at the top, and it'll just shower back down inside. So if we don't have the water in there, it'll be very, very dry. So basically put all of your cuttings inside. What you want to do is put your lid on. Okay, and close it up. And what we want to do is we want to put this underneath a tree that has about 75% shade, or you can use a shade cloth if you want. You can buy this at Orchard Supply, Home Depot, anything like that. Basically it blocks out about 65, maybe 70% of the sun. The reason for that is that if this is put out in direct sunlight, it would get way too hot. It would probably get about 120, 130 degrees, and they don't like that temperature. The cuttings will typically root the best at about 75 to 80 degrees. Any hotter than 85 and it'll probably slow your success rate pretty dramatically. So what we want to do is take this, put it underneath a peach tree or a plum tree that allows a little bit of light to flicker through the leaves. Or you can, like I said, use the shade cloth. You want to put it up above. You never want to put it against here, as that heat transfer will just cook them. So once after two weeks, you're just going to want to take the lid off. And you always want to do this in the morning when it's cool, or late at night as well when it's cool. You never want to do this during the daytime, because the amount of humidity in here is what they're getting accustomed to. And when you take off the lid, it's going to open up it's going to open it up, and the humidity is going to escape, and it's going to wilt the plant. So you always want to do this late at night. Basically what you want to do after that 2 weeks, you want to get a brand new clean cup of water, wash off the hormone, okay, and then put it right back into a clean cup of water, and then put the lid back on one more time, and you're going to put it back underneath that shade cloth, or put it underneath the trees, seal it up. And about 2 weeks to 3 weeks, depending on the size of the cane, because like I've showed you with some of the larger cuttings, where they're about 1/4 of an inch in diameter, those will take maybe about 3 or 4 weeks. So you need to be patient with the larger ones. They don't root as fast, but the results in the end will be far superior to the smaller ones because now you have a bigger plant right from the get-go rather than a small plant. So the small ones will root probably 2 to 3 weeks after the initial, once you've changed cleaned the water. So once you've done that, then you can always take off the lid and just check them every week or so. You do want to make sure that if there's any kind of mold or what's called gray mold or botrytis blight, if you ever get that, I would probably remove that sample from the bin and let it dry out. Forget about it, sacrifice it, because that is very, it's something that will proliferate right through your entire bin very, very quickly and infect everything else. Okay, so we established that we need to have the cane in the water with the Rootone on it for 2 weeks, and then we'll wash the Rootone off and we'll have it in there for another 2 weeks. At the 3rd or 4th week, at that point, we're going to start seeing some results, and this will indicate that something is starting to happen. And you can see here on these canes, they're starting to bulge out. They're no longer straight. They're starting to expand. Also, you can see that the color is starting to change. It's going from a green to a yellow, and in some cases will go to a white. Also, you can see that there's some little breaks, some like cracks. Well, this is where the roots are going to start to emerge. Also, you'll see little bulges where roots will start to emerge as well. So when you start to see that, then probably another week, no more than 2 weeks, I'd say, you'll start to see some roots grow. So you can see with this thick cane that you can actually produce some pretty solid results. And the small ones will produce great results as well, but the thicker, bigger canes will produce a bigger plant much quicker. And once they actually start to grow, then you can see the roots will start to expand out. Okay, so now that we've established how to get the roots going, what we need to do is actually plant them in the soil. So what we need to do is have a container that we're going to grow them in. I like to use the clear containers. These are just soda. I use the 3 liters and 2 liters for the bigger ones and these for the smaller ones. I like to go ahead and cut off the label. Okay, just like that. And then what we need to do is actually get out a knife and go ahead and stab this. Okay. Okay, so now we've stabbed through that. The reason why we do that is because the top here is very, very hard, and these are sheet metal cutters, and it'll be very difficult to actually cut through here. So by actually making that little stab mark, you can actually go through here and cut this through quite easily. And we want to cut it down to the point where the sides are straight rather than at the bevel. Okay, so we cut that off so that it's straight here, and as you can see that there's a bevel there, so smaller won't go through. All right. Okay, so what you want to do is take this, go ahead and drill a couple holes here at the bottom so that the water will drain through. And what we normally want to do is fill it up about halfway full of dirt, and we'll take the cutting, place it about here. Like I said, fill this up with just regular old potting soil, and I use different types of potting soil, one being Gardener and Bloom. Okay, so now that we have our container ready, we've chopped off the top, we've got 2 or 3 holes drilled at the bottom, then we need to actually go ahead and plant the stem. So we'll go ahead and bring our dirt out, and I just use regular old garden potting soil. and we'll go over the details as to which ones work best and all that kind of thing later on. So I'll go ahead and fill it up about halfway. Okay. And we'll pretend like this stem has roots on it, and I like to have about 2 or 3 bud eyes that are below the dirt level. Okay. And then we'll just pack the dirt around it. And of course you want to make sure that the roots are not too long, because when you pack the dirt on, then it'll actually break some of the roots. So once you've got that, then go ahead and water it, and it'll probably shrink down a little bit, and then go ahead and top it off again as well. Now if your roots actually do get too long, which these actually are, what you can actually do is take a pair of scissors and just go ahead and cut them back. Normally I like to plant them when the roots are about 1/8 of an inch to 3/16 of an inch, no longer than that. So if they are this long, then go ahead and cut them back, or you can just very gently apply soil to it. But it is preferable to have the roots much shorter. Okay, so once you've got them planted in the soil, then you're going to want to make sure you label it. And I just create my own labels by taking a white yogurt cup and taking those cutters again and just making a little spade here, like this. Okay. And then what you can do is you can just take a little sandpaper, go ahead and rough up the ends a little bit like this. And then you can go ahead and label it whatever you want. Okay, and put the date on there if you want. Okay, so pencil works great. You never want to use a pen, because the pen will wear off. The pencil will last for a very long time. Go ahead and just stick that in there. And then what we need to do next is to put it in a tall environment, because our Tupperware container will no longer be large enough for this particular growth, because it'll get much taller, and we don't want to have it hit the roof. So we're going to show you the next environment so that it'll grow nice and fast. Okay, so now that we've established how we produce the roots, and like I pointed out before, the root starts about here, and then after about a week to a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, the roots will start to grow down to the bottom. And I like to go ahead and put it in a 5-gallon bucket like this, because we don't want the roots to start accumulating here down at the bottom, because once they start to overlap each other, then they tend to slow down a little bit, and we want to keep it constantly growing. So I put it in a 5-gallon. I'd never want to put this in a 1 or a 3-gallon. They're just too small and they'll get root bound too quickly. So I like to use the 5-gallon. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and put a little bit of water in here to reduce the surface tension between the plastic and the dirt, and then I'll place my fingers around the cutting like this, and then tip it upside down and jerk it real quick, and it'll break free and it'll slowly slide out. And then when I prepare the dirt here, I like to put about 1/3 of the soil that I typically use, the potting soil, and then I'll use this alfalfa pellets. And I typically use between 6 and 8 ounces. This is a 6-ounce yogurt cup. So I'll go ahead and put a 1/3 of this cup at that layer, and maybe if you want you can mix it up, and then I'll add a little bit more dirt about halfway up, put a little bit more of the alfalfa, and then mix it up some more. And then once it goes up to about the halfway point, this would probably be about the right point. So the top of the 5-gallon with the dirt level here. So basically, once you slide that out, you're going to want to put it in here, and then fill up the rest of it with dirt, and then just go ahead and throw the rest of the alfalfa in here. So once it's in this environment and you have it firmly planted, go ahead and water it, and then you don't want it to be out in the air, because the plant is going to want a very humid environment so that it continues to grow very quickly. So what I've devised is to use a tomato cage like this, and then go ahead and place it over the top like this. And to create a greenhouse environment, I like to use these trash bags, and I have a clear one and I have a semi-opaque white one. Now I use the clear one during the winter months because the lack of sun, lack of heat, the duration of the time in which the sun is exposed to the plant. So you have November, December, January, February, maybe even as late as March, you would want to use the clear bag so that more light gets in there. Now when the sun starts to, the days get longer and the sun exposure is more prolonged and more intense, you want to use the white bags. So that would be, you know, maybe March, depending on what the temperature here is, like in the Bay Area of California, or April, May, June, July, August, September, all the way up to October or November, depending on if we have a hot fall or not. So what you can do, what I'll do is put the white bag or the clear bag over in this case over the top. Okay, and then you want to seal it shut, so you want to trap in all that moisture. So I use just a spool of speaker wire that I get from Radio Shack. It's about $8 or something like that. And then you can go ahead, and there's actually 2 of them, so you need to separate them. And then go ahead and tie it shut. And then that'll trap in all of the moisture and the heat. And so if it's a cool night, then the heat will be trapped inside, and it'll take much longer for the heat to dissipate. So once you have it sealed up, now during the winter months, because the sun is not as intense, you can put this almost in direct sunlight for a long portion of the day. But during the summertime, when you have the white bag on, you can also put it out in direct sunlight, but you do have to watch it. And I also put at the top here a little quarter-size hole so that I can look down inside, see what's going on, and also this way you can water the plant as well. And because it stays humid in there, you would only need to water it maybe once a week, maybe even 2 times a week. It just really depends on the temperature and the time of the year that you're doing it. You just need to use a little bit of common sense. Also, the plant may start to turn brown on the outside edge if it gets too hot. Typically when it's in this environment, the plant can endure up to about 100, 110, sometimes 120 degrees, depending on how humid it is inside. But you do want to watch that fairly carefully. And because of that high humidity, high heat, this is going to rocket like crazy in terms of the growth. Now, while it's growing, the plant will produce a bloom on the first new growth. Once it's planted, the plant will grow and it'll bloom the very first cycle. Now when it starts to open, that's when you actually want to cut it off, because you're going to want to enjoy it in your kitchen table, and you don't want to leave it inside here because the petals will start to rot because of the high humidity and the intense heat. The blooms don't do too well in the intense heat, but the plant loves it. So later on, the blooms will be much better, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So, like I said, you want to cut it off, and I typically cut back about 1/3, maybe even half. And you always want to do this either in the morning or at night. You never want to do this during the day, because once you take this bag off, all the humidity will escape and the plant will dry out very, very quickly. Okay, so you want to do this. I always do it late at night. So I'll take the bag off, cut off the stem, put it in the water, and I'll put the bag right back on it and tie it back up again, because we want to accelerate the growth even more. So the growth will now probably reach the top the next time around, because you've actually made the plant a little bit higher when you cut it off. So that next growth will probably be longer and more healthy and even bigger. And it'll also probably start producing new basal breaks from underneath the ground, and that's really what we're looking for. And in a minute I'll show you what you can expect to grow in the time frames that we were talking about. So this one right here was rooted December 28th, and it's February, the second week of February right now, so that's just a little more than 6 to 7 weeks. And you can see that it's actually started to produce a little bit of greenery here. Okay, so once you have that planted, then I'll go ahead and show you what we can achieve. Okay, so this right here is actually a cutting from a hybrid that I hybridized this year. It's called the Night of Magic, and you'll see that on the screen shortly. So this one, it was a hybrid that I produced in January. It was just a little baby seedling. And then in September 1st of 2012, it produced a full-size plant. Well, I took a cutting of it and rooted it, went through the entire process like you saw here, and this is after, what was that, about 4 months or 5 months. So September 1st, went through the entire process, and now here in February you have almost a fully mature plant. So you'll see that it outgrew the bag, so I had to take the bag off. Now when it starts to get too big and it's going to grow beyond the bag, you want to take the bag off at nighttime only. You never want to do this in the morning hours, okay? Because you want it to acclimate throughout the night. So you take the bag off at night, and because of the cooler temperatures, it won't wilt. And I'd probably want to water it as well before you took the bag off and got it well saturated. And so you want to anticipate this happening. So when it gets too tall, so if you've cut it off a second time and you know that the third growth is going to be beyond, that right there might be a good time to go ahead and take the bag off, because after it has bloomed, a lot of the lower foliage is actually starting to harden up. So you don't want to wait until you get new growth like this that's very tender, because when the new tender growth is exposed to the air, that's actually going to be very susceptible to wilting because of the lack of humidity. So like I said, once you've cut it off the second time, you might want to go ahead and take the bag off at that point and start acclimating it for the air out here that we normally grow them in. So go ahead and take the bag off, acclimate it throughout the night. In the morning, you're going to want to keep it in the shady area. Okay, you never want to put it out in the sun. And if it's during the summertime when it's getting 90 or 100 degrees, I'd probably bring it inside the house or the garage where the temperature is much more mild, because it's going to be very susceptible to wilting if it's put into an environment where it's very, very warm. Okay, and once it has gone through one day of being in the shade, and it's daytime and it's 70, 80 degrees, it's going to slowly acclimate. The next day, keep it in the shade for probably 2 days. On the third day, you can probably start bringing it out into a semi-sunny area. And if you see no ill effects, then you can probably on the fourth day put it out into full sunlight, and it'll start growing just fine. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to just show the different types of soils that I've used in the past, and for the most part they're all pretty much the same. Here, Gardener and Bloom potting soil. Okay, so that's a good soil that I've used. Stay Green, it's a little bit cheaper. Not as good as the Gardener and Bloom. And I've also used this Sunland product. This is a very good product. I've had very good results with this. So the Gardener and Bloom and the Sunland are probably the two top, but Sunland is probably the best. I believe it has a lot of good things in there that keep the soil neutral, and it produces really rapid growth in the roots. Okay, so we spoke about the different soils And basically we were just using potting soil, but there is one little amendment that I do add to it, and that's basically putting in about 20 to 25% of your native clay. And the reason you would want to do that is that the potting soil will tend to fall apart once you slide it out, and that would be in the 5-gallon drum. So once you plant it in the 5-gallon, you're going to want to mix it up as 75% of the potting soil and 25% of the native clay. So when you slide it out, that clay will kind of bind it together so that it won't all fall apart. But when you're actually rooting it in the small little container, the clear container, it's going to be straight potting soil. Okay, so always just keep that in mind. So when you're going to put it in the 5-gallon, that's when you want to add the native clay, about 20 to 25%. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do is going to move this off to the side for now, and we'll show you another method. So we talked about doing this during the winter months, and most people are thinking, well, how am I going to get a cane to grow or to use so that I can root? Well, in this environment that I pointed out before with the tomato cage and the bag over the top, you can grow your plant October, November, December, January, and February, because it's hot and humid in there. It's like a greenhouse grower that is trying to grow roses for Valentine's Day. They're growing them through December, January, and February, ready for the stores. So in this case, you're doing the exact same thing. You've got it in a tent environment. It's warm, it's hot, it's humid. You got a cane ready to go. All you need to do is just cut it off after it blooms, and then you can start doing it in December or January. Okay, so we just used the same Tupperware container that we did before, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to use a heating element. I use a fish aquarium heater that is preset to 78 degrees. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to stick it to the bottom, and then we're going to fill it up with water so that the entire water inside here is going to stay consistently 78 degrees. So if you're in Wisconsin or Montana where it gets 10 degrees, well, inside here it's going to stay 78 degrees, and it could be snowing outside and you can still grow this stuff. Okay, so by putting this in there, you turn it on, heat up the water. Now, this little platform right here is where everything is going to sit on. So if you take these cups and put it inside just the plain old water, they'll tip over because of buoyancy. So basically you need to make this little platform, and they'll stay above the water, but you can have just a little bit touching, so you might want to have the water level just above the platform. So go ahead and do the exact same thing that we did before. Make the cutting, label your cup, put it in the water, 2 weeks with a hormone off, 2 weeks with a hormone off, and of course keep the lid on so that it stays humid inside here, and it'll grow great during the winter months. So you can grow anytime between December, January, and February. Like I showed you before, all of those cuttings were all done December 28th. The dead of winter, probably the coldest time of the year here in California, so we can go ahead and do it at any time that you want. Okay, so now you've planted it in the 5-gallon pot, and it's growing very, very rapidly, especially if you put the plastic over the top so that it becomes a greenhouse environment. Now, the roots are going to develop very, very quickly, and I'd probably have to say that after about 6 to 8 months, the roots are going to reach the bottom and they'll start getting root bound. So I would recommend that after the first year of 12 months, you should definitely plant it in the ground, because it'll far exceed the 5-gallon pot. So it'll be a lot better off if you put it in the ground. Okay, so basically in summary, you saw the different types of soil that I used. They're all basically the same. There's really not much different from one soil to the next. They're all basically good. Some are a little bit better than the others, but then you're going to spend a little bit more. Like the Sunland is a little bit more expensive than the others, and the Stay Green is probably the cheapest. So basically, this is a very simple method that doesn't require too much effort. You simply put it underneath a tree and let it go and check it every week or two. Other than that, you can control your own environments by using the Tupperware containers. You can create your own little tents by using the tomato cages and then put the bags over the top. So it's very simple, doesn't really cost a lot of money to do it, and it's quite effective. So hope you give it a try and have lots of success.